This channel is part of the History Hit network. Stick around to find out more.
August 1945, a pivotal point in the history of mankind. Preparations for the deployment of a weapon whose destructive power the world had never seen before. American aircraft on their way to drop the first atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the Japanese harbor city of Hiroshima was destroyed. 3 days later, Nagasaki. More than 10,000 people were killed outright.
The nuclear age really began with the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the demonstration of how powerful these weapons could be and how really terrifying they could be.
The beginning of a new era. U.S. scientists worked feverishly on developing the bomb. They feared Hitler's Germany was about to build it before them. Later, it was reported that the Germans had abandoned their plans to build an atomic bomb. But new evidence and documents, unknown until now, tell a different story.
There's an interesting report from Marshal Zhukov to Stalin, dated October 2nd, 1945. The subject is the German atomic weapons program. New sources of the report have been confirmed. But I think the most interesting aspect is Zhukov's statement that the Germans had already built the atomic bomb.
According to existing construction plans, the bomb might have looked like this. For the Allies, the idea was terrifying.
That's why, during the final months of the war, the Allies concentrated all their efforts on defeating the German Reich as quickly as possible. The clock was ticking, and there was no time to lose.
Allied special units searched for Hitler's so-called wonder weapon. They discovered many clandestine developments in the subterranean world of the German armament industry. In late 1944, American special units gave an all clear. The Germans had fallen far behind in their development of the atom bomb. But then, they discovered locations, plans, and names that were thus far unknown. Secret projects conducted under the auspices of the SS at obscure locations in Hitler's Reich and in the occupied countries. Underground projects dedicated to the development of weapons of mass destruction. Some of the trails led to places near the Austrian city of Linz.
Much of what we know about the Third Reich and Nazism that we know is very important that we know that now. We only know that because other people pushed to do research and to find out about things when the authorities didn't want them to know.
Spring 1945. The Allies had broken the last German resistance. Arriving after the troops fighting at the front, American special units followed, searching for German high-tech weapons. Among other things, jet fighters that were already in action. But there was evidence of further dangerous secret projects.
American reports often spoke of weapons of desperation that might have been deployed in the last weeks of the war.
Die Angst der Alliierten war durchaus berechtigt.
The fear of the Allies was well-founded. The Germans possessed highly dangerous chemical weapons and possibly a significant amount of nuclear explosives that could have had a devastating effect.
U.S. troops advanced in Thuringia. Near Nordhausen, they discovered a gigantic subterranean factory for rockets and flying bombs. The victors were impressed. Then they discovered concentration camp prisoners and forced laborers.
History Hit is a streaming platform that exclusively releases quality historical documentaries covering fascinating figures and moments in history from all over the world. From ancient Neolithic cultures to the dawn of the space race, History Hit has thousands of hours of content with unrivaled access to the world's best historians. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now for a 14-day free trial, and Timeline fans can get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code TIMELINE at checkout.
Thousands died underground from exhaustion, hunger, and SS-inflicted torture. The American units wanted to secure the captured weapons. They searched for those in charge. In captured documents and intercepted radio transmissions, one name showed up repeatedly: Hans Kammler. As a leading SS construction engineer, Kammler was partially responsible for death camps like Auschwitz. Because of Allied air raids, he moved entire armament factories underground.
Kammler possessed a high degree of managerial talent. He was prepared to take great risks and would stop at nothing to achieve his goals.
Tens of thousands died during the construction of the underground rocket factory in Nordhausen. But Kammler carried out his work with the greatest ambition.
Step by step, Kammler received even more authority from Hitler and Himmler to develop secret weapons. Eventually, he became the central figure in this area of responsibility.
Hans Kammler, Hitler's head of development for secret weapons. With ruthless efficiency, he moved ahead with the design and construction of German rockets. An engine for a V-2 rocket. In early September 1944, the first V-2s were deployed. These weapons of terror were meant to intimidate and kill residents of London and Paris. The British were afraid that the V-2 warheads might be armed with weapons of mass destruction. Detonation sites were examined with Geiger counters. Was it only a matter of time?
It was clear that conventional explosives weren't powerful enough to fulfill their military purpose. So constructors tried to develop either chemical warheads or even new nuclear weapons to achieve contamination through radioactive substances. They considered attaching nuclear weapons to the rocket warheads. This was confirmed by many Soviet intelligence reports.
But German rockets weren't only supposed to become more deadly, they were also supposed to fly further.
We know that there was a series of other projects following the V-2. The goal was to increase the range and payloads of the rockets. The projects A-9 and A-10 were particularly important. Once combined, these two rockets were supposed to have sufficient range to be able to reach as far as the USA.
Hitler's rocket man, Werner von Braun. In the years following the war, von Braun went on to build atomic rockets for the USA. After Germany's defeat, he also spoke of a warhead with enormous destructive capability, one that was supposed to be attached to a rocket. One newspaper reported there was little doubt that this was indeed an atomic bomb. But how much of this was an unfulfilled plan, and how much was reality? One thing is certain. Heinrich Himmler's SS worked to develop this and similar technologies.
The SS, during the last 2 years of the war, was very aggressively interested in controlling as much of the science-based weapons production as possible. They also were clearly interested in the nuclear weapons project and others. Scientists working under the authority of the SS or with the SS were trying to make new sorts of weapons to the very end of the war.
But just how far did the German scientists get? Soviet documents mention 2 atomic tests, both of which took place in Thuringia. They're mentioned in Soviet military secret service reports from the GRU, reports from the Russian president's archives.
The most important GRU report is the one from March 23, 1945, just before the end of the war, describing how the test was conducted.
Even earlier, in November 1944, an agent reported on test preparations.
The Germans are about to test a new secret weapon, one with enormous destructive power. The already constructed bomb has a diameter of 1.5 meters and consists of interconnected hollow spheres.
This is approximately how the bomb was supposed to look, according to construction plans. The scientific director of the Soviet atomic project, Kurchatov, received a further, even more alarming report. He concluded that the German plan would enable construction of a fission bomb, according to the implosion principle. According to the report,
our reliable source in Germany says the Germans have conducted 2 trial explosions with immense force in Thuringia. Trees within a 600-meter radius were flattened. Prisoners of war placed at the center of the explosion were vaporized, whereby often no traces of them remained. Additionally, a strong radioactive effect was observed.
That means the agent was either present at the test or had access to inner circles and was able to collect accurate information about the test.
We know for certain that the information came from a proven, reliable source who had access to areas of the SS responsible for the development of atomic bombs.
And yet in March 1945, Kurchatov reported to Stalin that due to the relatively weak power of the explosion, he wasn't entirely convinced that the Germans had detonated an atomic bomb like the one in the construction plans, but rather a less potent test model. The Soviet atomic weapons specialist, Davidov, examined the German bomb plans and concluded that they represented a well-thought-out concept for a bomb.
I was impressed at how ingenious and qualified the contents of the documents were. They couldn't possibly have come from a normal agent, but rather from a specially trained person with the necessary knowledge. The details are described so exactly, as though they came from the inventor of the bomb himself.
Soviet physicists recognized highly advanced elements in the German construction plans, such as a high-voltage discharge tube, the kind used later in more modern weapons. Sergei Lev Davidov had even tested Soviet atomic weapons himself and drew an astounding comparison.
It's like a copy of one of our bombs, or our bomb is the copy.
After the war, Stalin had one question: how far did the Germans get? In autumn 1945, Marshal Zhukov reported,
The Germans achieved good results in the theoretical and practical research and application of atomic energy, which resulted in the construction of an atomic bomb.
Based on information collected by the Red Army in the Soviet occupation zone in Germany, the Zhukov report attempted to establish the level of knowledge achieved by German atomic scientists. According to the collected information, it concluded that the Germans had indeed developed an atomic weapon.
but where had the weapon been built? Where did the weapons-grade uranium come from? Available sources provide no information, and yet there were reports of tests.
Reports on the testing of a newly constructed German weapon in Thuringia hadn't only reached the Soviet General Staff by the end of March 45, but also the Supreme Commander of the American Forces, General Eisenhower. He received a report from a German officer who witnessed the test. Eisenhower then sent air reconnaissance to the test area, but nothing was discovered.
Allerdings nichts festgestellt worden.
A French intelligence document from April 1945 described the test as that of a so-called electro-atomic bomb. During the test, which had a limited effective radius, Russian and Polish POWs had been incinerated, and the report concluded that the test represented a technical revolution. Mid-April 1945. U.S. troops reached the military training area Hillersleben, near Magdeburg. A technical unit from American military intelligence examined the area. It made startling discoveries that caused the unit's commander, Colonel Keck, to make an immediate report to Washington.
Here it was learned that the Germans had gone far in the development of atomic bombs. And nevertheless, their progress was considerable and indicated that they were coming very close to the solution of the problem.
We can't establish exactly what the Americans found on the basis of this document. There was talk of the development of an atomic bomb. We don't know, however, whether or not actual documents or other materials were found. It's an indication, though, that certain developments took place in Hillersleben, about which we had no previous knowledge.
An American special unit named Alsos was looking for proof that the Germans were developing atomic weapons, looking for reactors or centrifuges that could be used to produce weapons-grade fissile materials. In the southern German town of Haigerloch, they made a discovery.
Werner Heisenberg's Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics had been evacuated from Berlin to Haigerloch. And there, Heisenberg and other scientists built what they called a uranium machine, a nuclear reactor experiment. It was cubes of metal uranium suspended in a tub of heavy water. And this experiment almost, but not quite, reached criticality. That is, it was able to achieve a self-sustaining nuclear reaction.
Nobel Prize winner Werner Heisenberg, Germany's most prominent physicist, was a controversial figure. He later maintained that he wanted to prevent Hitler from constructing an atomic bomb. But others say Heisenberg simply lacked the means and the know-how to build the bomb for Hitler himself. Yet another trail, the testing grounds of German army ordnance in Kummersdorf, near Berlin. Here as well, there was an experimental reactor that broke down, probably due to an accident. This is where physicist Kurt Diebner performed his research. Documents strongly suggest Diebner wanted to proceed from experiments straight to the construction of an atomic bomb. But in Kummersdorf as well, the Germans were unable to produce the fissile material necessary to build the bomb. At the Hillersleben testing grounds, the Americans found references to a group of prominent German explosives experts led by Erich Schumann. In order to build an atom bomb, the group fell back on a tried and tested concept, that of a hollow charge, the principle used in rocket-propelled grenades. The hollow charge directs explosive energy to a single point, enabling it to penetrate even thick steel armor.
it's not quite clear what it was. The new type of weapon, nuclear weapon, that these Army Ordnance scientists were working on toward the end of the war was designed to use high pressure to possibly produce nuclear fusion reactions.
Whether or not this actually could have worked is debatable. After the war, Schuman called it an unproven concept for an atomic bomb. This alternative concept is a sharp contrast to the German bomb described in the Soviet GRU report.
Now, it's not clear that it worked, but it would have been more than a dirty bomb. A dirty bomb simply takes radioactive materials you already have and distributes them. This would actually have produced new radioactive material.
But aside from fusion matter, even this bomb would have required a small amount of highly enriched material.
I'm skeptical that they could possibly have succeeded. But I should add that it's not just about a Hiroshima-style bomb, because we know that at least this one group was working on other sorts of designs.
In order to build bombs like the kind later dropped on Japan, the USA expended enormous effort, employing hundreds of scientists and creating an entire industry. It was necessary in order to produce several kilos of plutonium and several dozen kilos of highly enriched uranium. The White Sands testing grounds in New Mexico, a prototype of the bomb that was later dropped on Nagasaki. This is where the first detonation of a weapon of mass destruction in the history of mankind took place. Uncontrolled nuclear fission released incredible energy, equaling around 20,000 tons of TNT.
This simply isn't something you can do under very difficult conditions within a few months at the end of the war. That does not, however, mean that people were not trying to do that. And I want to make this distinction very clear. There is no reason to doubt that people were attempting to do these things.
But what evidence of this did the Nazi leadership leave behind? There are protocols made during the visit of the Romanian head of state in August 1944.
Als Antonescu Hitler besuchte, standen sowjetische Truppen schon nahe.
When Antonescu visited Hitler, Soviet troops were already approaching the Romanian border. Antonescu desperately wanted to get out of the war, but Hitler did everything possible to keep him on his side. He informed Antonescu about the latest weapons developments. He spoke of a V-3 rocket and of a V-4, supposedly able to destroy every living thing within a 3-kilometer radius. This radius of destruction meant it could only have been a nuclear weapon or a large coal dust bomb with incredible power. Germany was also working to develop such a weapon.
But at what locations and with what means? What secrets were contained within the innumerable mines and underworlds within Hitler's Reich? There are still many unexamined locations that might have been used to develop new weapons.
In the last few years, more and more information has come out about additional underground facilities for scientific research or for production.
During the final months of the war, the SS General Kammler had more and more people and material relocated underground. He wanted to concentrate his remaining resources. In daylight, these transports might have fallen victim to air raids. The Americans also searched Czech territory for secret weapons production sites and evidence of nuclear research. while the country's citizens cheered them as liberators. Then there was a new buzzword circulating, Alpenfestung, the Alpine Redoubt. There was fear that the SS had retreated to the mountains of Bavaria and Austria in order to defend themselves with the latest weapons developed by Hitler's engineers. Once more, there was talk of an atom bomb. Then, the search continued.
The Alpine Fortress was the last hope, a chimera of the Third Reich. It was here that the existing secret weapons were supposed to be developed to deployability and bring about a decisive turnaround in the war.
As newly discovered sources prove, the term Alpine Fortress didn't only designate a defensive stronghold, but also a system of subterranean tunnels. Reichsführer SS Himmler wanted to locate the tunnels as deeply underground as possible to protect them from the latest generation of powerful Allied bombs. They were built mainly by forced laborers and concentration camp prisoners.
Kammler also played a significant role in the relocation of weapons projects to subterranean locations. He was the man who concentrated the necessary resources in order to make these projects successful.
The head of the secret weapons programs was a ray of hope for Hitler. The site, located between Salzburg and Vienna, is also equipped with reinforced buildings and subterranean rooms. It's also known that there was a rocket test stand there. According to U.S. intelligence sources, highly dangerous substances like thorium and uranium compounds were handled in the lower-lying tunnels.
And because there were a great many different metals and chemicals in the components that were listed, we can assume that they were trying to take explosive substances like TNT and somehow improve them. Whether we want to designate these materials as super explosives or not is irrelevant. They certainly have nothing to do with conventional explosives.
Clear evidence of new warfare agents, and there are other trails. St. Georgen-Gusen, near Linz. Within only 13 months here, a giant underground factory with the name Bergkristall was constructed. Officially, the location was used solely for the assembly of Messerschmitt jet aircraft. It was only 8 kilometers long and consisted of a single-level structure. But this explanation has been in doubt for some time now.
For decades, there has been speculation that a second level existed in the underground mine system Bergkristall in St. Georgen.
Files from an engineering firm that took part in the construction of the underground mine system during the war. Here, photos and other documents prove the site was built on several different levels.
The files on the daily construction reports and descriptions suggest the length of the mine system was around 16 kilometers. All this was achieved by a single construction firm, but the entire system was built by several firms and several work groups. For this reason, we have reason to believe the subterranean site was much larger than it's assumed today.
Other documents also suggest the mine system was up to 40 kilometers long. These photos were taken in tunnels outside the known Bergkristall site. Geoelectric measurements to examine floor profiles revealed that there were indeed several different levels.
We discovered the Bergkristall structures. The tunnels are quite visible. And beneath the Bergkristall, we found further structures. A short time later, a photo was discovered on which these different levels could be recognized.
When you access the main entrance, there were water basins located in the tunnel to the left. This area was used as a gigantic hall. Some 20 meters after the water basins, there was an elevator. It was at ground level. There were two elevators next to each other, and we lowered a torch for illumination. My brother told me he knew of other levels, and that there were 5 or 6 floors beneath us, where other tunnels were located.
Highly increased levels of radiation have also been measured at the Bergkristall site. These increased levels pose the question of whether they were of natural origin, or were they remnants from times past. These matters will have to be investigated. There's another interesting location near St. Georgian. During the war, an octagonal structure was erected there. Today, the octagon is covered by a layer of concrete, which was partially removed in 2013. This object was discovered during excavation work. Experts confirm that it's a component from a particle accelerator used in nuclear research. The University of Arizona Institute for Physics writes,
"In our machine, there are components that correspond to historical examples."
Geoelectrical measurements were also conducted at the octagon.
Using this method, we were able to identify other objects located beneath the concrete.
What exactly is located beneath the octagonal structure?
I think there's enough reason to conduct excavations.
Why is there a letter in the archives of the engineer Jakob from 1955 suggesting that 2 nuclear power plants should be constructed at the location of the octagon?
To this day, I have no idea how my father came upon the detailed idea of the nuclear power plant. He was a gifted construction engineer, but had no connection to physics or nuclear physics.
But what were these plans connected to?
In the drawings, the planned nuclear power plant is octagonal.
Are the shape and the location complete coincidences? And what is hidden here underground? An already existing plant?
In the sketches, there are 5 different levels.
Drillings, excavations, and measurements could clarify the purpose of the plans and artifacts. Another document presents a further mystery. An expert report from the Austrian Society for Atomic Energy from 1968. It deals with the question of whether or not deeper-lying tunnels would be suitable as nuclear waste storage facilities. The report even mentions areas that were demolished during the war.
Das Besondere an Gusen ist eben, dass die SS...
Gusen is particularly interesting because in 1943, the SS set up a major industrial park there. In 1943 as well, Hans Kammler also had a hand in dealings there concerning several different projects. In that very same year, top-secret underground weapons programs were also established in Gusen.
strengster Geheimhaltung unterirdische Rüstungsprojekte auch zu etablieren.
There were high-security wings belonging to the SS, to which even Wehrmacht generals were denied access.
There are very important primary sources that have been preserved, namely the so-called railroad carriage control books from the St. Georgian Gusen rail station. It's remarkable that the engineer Kammler himself is entered explicitly as a recipient of goods, as though they were intended for him personally.
The consigners of the shipments are also mentioned. Next to everyday goods, such as food and building materials, other items also arrived, from locations at which rockets and poison gas were being manufactured, and where nuclear research also took place.
The SS was very advanced in terms of research. They could also take ruthless action, had sufficient resources, and took full advantage of those circumstances. When you consider the nature of the materials delivered, together with the size of the facility, you can't help but arrive at certain suspicions, namely that they were trying to produce, examine, or test something very extraordinary there.
There were other deliveries of technical equipment directly to the SS. Alongside special raw materials, there were also irradiation devices. The electrical installations at the site were massive. Electrical connections for up to 6 million volt amperes. What purpose did this serve? This incredible current strength is also mentioned in the Soviet Secret Service report on German atomic weapons. Was it purely a coincidence?
We assume that in Gusen, Kammler was trying to set up a center for the development of German secret weapons. This was clearly demonstrated by his efforts to concentrate rocket technology, atomic weapons technology, and aircraft technology at a single location under his own leadership.
And for this purpose, he recruited well-trained researchers and technicians from among the POWs and concentration camp prisoners. They came from many different countries.
The SS was much more ruthless about using slave and forced labor, about pushing people for production, about threatening scientists and engineers.
Some of the specialists believed cooperating with the SS was their chance to survive the ordeal. They couldn't have known that their knowledge of the secret facility would seal their fate.
In conversations with other inmates and deportees, I found out that each one of them was involved in some kind of metalworking profession. Automotive technology, electrotechnology, general technology. All of their professions were concentrated in these areas.
A striking number of international scientists and experts were working here.
Kammler saw his job as creating weapons for the Third Reich to use against its enemies to win the war, and nothing, no loss of life was too great a price to pay for that.
The families of concentration camp survivors and forced laborers will never forget the ordeals of their relatives.
My mother worked in the mines at St. Georgian. There were further mine tunnels beneath the area where she was located. She had contact to a Hungarian graduate engineer who also worked there. The man told her they were working on a weapon so powerful that if it were to be constructed and deployed, it would enable Hitler to win the war.
Further documents prove that prisoners at the site involved in resistance movements attempted to communicate details about the weapons production to the Allies. Among them were members of the French resistance group Marco Polo.
The Marco Polo network was particularly interested in new weapons, the V1s and V2s, and anything else considered as weapons of mass destruction. They sent this information to the Allies.
In one particular document, the name of a man is stressed repeatedly. A man who was supposed to be freed from a concentration camp at all costs.
The main argument for the rescue action was that the French atomic expert Jacques Bergier was supposedly among tens of thousands of prisoners.
According to his own statements, Bergier was forced by the SS to collaborate and was involved in nuclear physics research.
At the time, he was an accredited expert for nuclear fission, something quite remarkable in the days when the world didn't officially know that something like an atom bomb could even exist. A bomb based on splitting atomic nuclei.
In a further protocol, Bergier stated for the record that in January 1945, he was forced to hold a lecture for SS officers at the Gusen-Mauthausen concentration camp on the topic of atomic energy. There was also a standing order from the SS to eliminate unwanted witnesses in the end, thousands of them. The prisoners were trained by air raid alarm exercises to seek refuge in the tunnels as quickly as possible.
They planned not only to murder all of the prisoners, but also any witnesses from the general population as well. They sealed the prisoners in the tunnels for 2 days and 1 night, and then ordered the tunnels to be blown up.
This large-scale mass murder was averted because the Allied liberators were rapidly approaching. During these final days, Hitler ordered his generals to hold the fronts at any cost, to gain enough time to finish building the terrifying weapons that were supposed to bring about the turnaround in the war. By the time the concentration camps Mauthausen and Gusen were liberated, Hitler was already dead. Here, US troops found prisoners who barely managed to survive the murderously strenuous slave labor in the underground tunnels. There were thousands of fatalities, people from many different European nations whose descendants still mourn them to this day, and still ask, why?
My mother was so traumatized by her experiences that I could only get small bits of information from her about what had actually happened. She always said that she didn't want to discuss it. Towards the end of her life, she even threw away photos in order to finally rid herself of the memories, once and for all.
But what became of the commanders of the murderous armament makers? According to witnesses, Hans Kammler died in different locations and in different ways. Trapped in a hopeless situation in Bohemia, he allegedly took his own life with a bullet or with poison. In post-war Germany, his death was confirmed by a court. But there are indications that he survived.
His body was never found, nor were any of his personal files, and the account of his suicide provided by his subordinates was highly questionable.
Even source material seems to refute the story. His alleged suicide contradicts reports of the U.S. intelligence service CIC, according to which Kammler was arrested on May 9, 1945 by U.S. troops, but then escaped sometime later.
That was an important source. The report that Kammler was also able to escape sometime later should probably be considered a false flag operation by the intelligence service to hide the fact that he was really in the hands of the Americans.
This man showed off the fact that he was changing sides. Rocket scientist Wernher von Braun. He's setting out to build rockets for the victors. Hans Kammler once reportedly told German armaments minister Albert Speer that he would someday offer the Americans further weapons systems. But where could this man have ended up? The man who built death factories and weapons of retaliation for Hitler, the son of a high-ranking U.S. intelligence officer, tells of his father's greatest secret.
My father communicated the fact that Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, Dr. Ing, surrendered to the Americans and was brought to America.
OSS officer Donald Richardson and his son John. The intelligence serviceman was under the direct command of U.S. Supreme Forces Commander General Eisenhower and accompanied President Roosevelt to the most important conferences of the Allies. He was responsible for preventing high-ranking German knowledge bearers from falling into Soviet hands. Was Hans Kammler brought to the USA for this reason?
My father couldn't talk about it on a piece of paper for 50 years. I couldn't talk about it till he died. This is the opportunity now, 70 years later, to tell this story.
But what did Kammler have to offer?
My father helped import 136 pounds of weapons-grade uranium, probably from sunk Georgian, Gusen, Bergkristall. Kammler, Dr. Ing, was incarcerated in a maximum security facility. My father and his team of agents wrung him like a rag, interrogated him. He lived for a short time in America. Most probably he died at his own hand, understandably, and sometime in 1947.
No other source has ever confirmed that Hans Kammler delivered the basic material to construct an atom bomb to the U.S. The claim is difficult to imagine and to corroborate. Yet no other man knew better about the secret weapons developed by the Nazis. Kammler was being sought by all the Allies, not only the Americans.
It is certainly true that in the last months of the war, Germany and the Americans and the Soviets and the British are flooded with rumors of dangerous resistance, of new kinds of weapons, that Hitler has been holding this last weapon in his hand for the very last minute in order to win the war.
In late May 1945, a German submarine bound for Japan surrendered to the Americans. Its lethal cargo was 560 kilograms of uranium oxide. Reportedly, the material was later used by the U.S. itself to build the first atomic bomb, Little Boy. On board the submarine, a bomb fuse expert and a close friend of Hans Kammler. Back in St. George and Gusen, documents that belong to a spy tell of a further secret weapons site. The entrance is supposedly located at a former SS shooting range.
If there's significant evidence of a site from the Second World War that might have been used to develop new sorts of weapons, that was run by the SS, that used forced slave labor, and it can be researched, that it exists or documents exist, of course, scholars, scientists, others should be allowed to do so.
Excavations at the shooting range in St. George and Gusen appear to confirm the spy's information. 3 meters beneath the surface, a reinforced structure made of granite and concrete appears. Steps lead downwards. But a short time later, the excavation is stopped by the authorities. They say it's only part of the shooting range.
I think that it's most likely that the authorities anticipate that what is found will be embarrassing.
The area is immediately placed under a historic preservation order. For the present, excavations and measurements are prohibited.
We should not assume that authorities will give up information just because they have it and we ask for it. In fact, you have to do what people have been doing for decades. When you find some evidence that something important happened, you have to fight and struggle and get more. Perhaps there was something important there, perhaps not, but you don't know until you find out. You don't know until you have the evidence. We should not assume that all it takes is to explain to authorities that something important happened there. The information is probably available. Please help us get that information. That will never happen. At least, I don't think so. That's not an excuse, but it's simply human nature. That's how my government works. That's how your government works. That's how the Nazi government worked. That's how governments work.
There are still more files to examine on the protagonists and the technologies. Excavations and measurements should be made in all those places where hidden underworlds from the Nazi era still present mysteries. And what is the conclusion about the search for the bomb? Hitler's weapons constructors had progressed much further than anyone had suspected. There were far more research groups involved than previously known. Many sources point to the construction of a German atom bomb. However, up to the present, there is no physical proof of how far it had progressed.
You really have to think in all possible directions. We're not even close to knowing everything, and all the archives haven't been open for us. The problem is that all the findings scattered around the world must be brought together. If that occurs, we would be much closer to the truth.
The test of a small atomic weapon during the Cold War. A tactical atomic artillery piece for the battlefield. Developed by the US in the early 1950s. A cannon for nuclear projectiles that put hollow charges to use. One can only speculate what nuclear weapons in the hands of the Nazi regime would have meant. But it's a fact that there were US plans to use atomic weapons against Germany if the need had arisen. Germany's defeat came just in the nick of time.